Okay, welcome to a series of lectures on the heart and electrocardiography. The electrocardiography unit is the most time-consuming of all of the units. The lectures are going to be the longest, and the lab is typically the longest as well. So I've broken these into hopefully sizable, manageable, bite-sized pieces. So I'm going to start by introducing a little bit about the heart itself. So the heart produces the strongest electrical signal in the body. So this is helpful because it's very forgiving when it comes to a first-time person trying to do electrocardiography. You can make a lot of mistakes and still get a pretty solid signal. So you should feel comforted by the fact that hopefully when you run through this lab, you'll really be able to get a signal almost hardly wherever you put the electrodes practically. So a theme regarding the heart is pairs. There's a lot of different systems for which there are two components. And we'll start with the two main functions of the circulatory system in the heart specifically. It pumps blood through two different circuits. And this material is also in the introduction PDF file. So you should be able to toggle between the two, and I'm trying to cover what I find to be most helpful. So the first circuit is the pulmonary circuit. This pulmonary, think lungs. This is the circuit that pumps the blood through the lungs. And then the other is the systemic circuit. And this is the circuit that pumps the blood through the rest of the body. So the pulmonary circuit, as you probably know from other classes, the function of the lungs is to take that deoxygenated blood and reoxygenate it through the breathing cycles. So that's the purpose of the pulmonary circuit, is to circle that blood through the lungs, get it reoxygenated. And then the systemic circuit takes that reoxygenated clean blood and pumps it through the rest of the body to allow all the other parts of the body to have the oxygen it needs to do the various functions it needs to do. So another theme of two comes in when we look at the chambers of the heart. There's 4 chambers, but you can divide them into different pairs of systems. One is there are 2 atria. That's the plural of atrium. There's the right atrium, left atrium. There's 2 ventricles, right and left. And of course there's then 2 halves, right and left. So we can split them up in different kinds of pairs. So the right pump is in charge of taking that deoxygenated blood and sending it through the pulmonary circuit. So the right side is kind of affiliated with the pulmonary circuit. And then the left side is affiliated with the systemic circuit. And just kind of an interesting point about the heart, sending the blood to the lungs doesn't take quite as much strength because the lungs are just right there near the heart. Sending the blood to the whole rest of the body takes a little more power. And so the left ventricle especially, which is that last chamber in charge of the systemic circuit, is the strongest chamber because it has to do the most work. It's got to get the blood all the way to the feet and the extremities, etc. So I'm going to play a couple of videos. Not sure what's the best way to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these links in also in Canvas. So if this gets irritating watching the videos on the screen, you can just X out of this video and move on to the linked YouTube videos. I'm going to go ahead and play them here anyway, just in case it seems more seamless for somebody to watch it that way.
The pathway of blood flows through the heart. Oxygen-poor blood from your body returns to the right atrium of the heart. Blood from your upper body returns through the superior vena cava. Blood from the lower body returns through the inferior vena cava. As the right atrium is filled with blood, it contracts, the tricuspid valve opens, and blood is pumped into the right ventricle of your heart. When the right ventricle is full, The tricuspid valve closes to prevent blood from flowing back into the atrium. The right ventricle contracts, pulmonary valve opens, and blood is pumped into the pulmonary artery and to your lungs. The pulmonary valve closes to prevent blood from flowing back into the ventricle. Oxygen-rich blood from the lungs returns to the left atrium of the heart. As the left atrium is filled with blood, it contracts. The mitral valve opens and blood is pumped into the left ventricle of your heart. This occurs at the same time as the right atrium pumps blood into the right ventricle on the other side of the heart. As the left ventricle is full, the mitral valve closes, the aortic valve opens, the left ventricle contracts, and oxygen-rich blood is pumped into the aorta to reach all parts of your body. This happens at the same time as the right ventricle pumps blood into the pulmonary artery on the other side of the heart. The aortic valve quickly closes to prevent blood from flowing back to the heart. Meanwhile, the atria have filled with blood, and the cycle repeats itself.
And I'm going to play one more video, and then that'll be the end of this sequence.
I just love hitting the open road and telling people that Liberty Mutual customizes your insurance.
The cardiac cycle refers to the sequence of events that occur and repeat with every heartbeat. It can be divided into two major phases, systole and diastole, each of which subdivides into several smaller phases. Systole and diastole, when not specified otherwise, refer to ventricular contraction and relaxation, respectively. Reminders: blood flows from higher to lower pressure. Contraction increases the pressure within a chamber, while relaxation lowers the pressure. AV valves open when atrial pressures are higher than ventricular pressures and close when the pressure gradient is reversed. Similarly, semilunar valves open when ventricular pressures are higher than aortic pulmonary pressures and close when the reverse is true. The cycle is initiated with the firing of the SA node that stimulates the atria to depolarize. This is represented by the P wave on the ECG. Atrial contraction starts shortly after the P wave begins and causes the pressure within the atria to increase, forcing blood into the ventricles. Atrial contraction, however, only accounts for a fraction of ventricular filling, because at this point, the ventricles are already almost full due to passive blood flow down the ventricles through the open AV valves. As atrial contraction completes, atrial pressure begins to fall, reversing the pressure gradient across the AV valves, causing them to close. The closing of the AV valves produces the first heart sound, S1, and marks the beginning of systole. At this point, ventricular depolarization, represented by the QRS complex, is halfway through, and the ventricles start to contract, rapidly building up pressures inside the ventricles. For a moment, however, the semilunar valves remain closed, and the ventricles contract within a closed space. This phase is referred to as isovolumetric contraction because no blood is ejected and ventricular volume is unchanged. Ventricular ejection starts when ventricular pressures exceed the pressures within the aorta and pulmonary artery. The aortic and pulmonic valves open and blood is ejected out of the ventricles. This is the rapid ejection phase. As ventricular repolarization, reflected by the T wave, begins, ventricular pressure starts to fall and the force of ejection is reduced. When ventricular pressures drop below aortic and pulmonary pressures, the semilunar valves close, marking the end of systole and beginning of diastole. Closure of semilunar valves produces the second heart sound, S2. The first part of diastole is, again, isovolumetric, as the ventricles relax with all valves closed. Ventricular pressure drops rapidly, but their volumes remain unchanged. Meanwhile, the atria are being filled with blood and atrial pressures rise slowly. Ventricular filling starts when ventricular pressures drop below atrial pressures, causing the AV valve to open, allowing blood to flow down the ventricles passively. The atria contract to finish the filling phase, and the cycle repeats itself. Thank you for watching.